Nobody believes in the Pittsburgh Steelers. They sucked, and they got absolutely just demolished by the Chargers 25-10.
What a miserable and brutal and inept offensive performance from the Pittsburgh Steelers. I mean, it was even worse than the final score indicates because we got that one lone garbage time touchdown with like 2 minutes to go in the fourth quarter. So it really was a 25-3 game. Fitz, watching Aaron Rodgers last night was really difficult. It was one of those nights when you're watching someone that has been great, that you know is one of the greats that will find themselves in their respective Hall of Fames. When it just makes you feel a little bit icky watching them. Like, it's kind of how I felt watching Tiger Woods, kind of limp on the golf course. Like, man, I don't want my last impression of one of the greatest, if not the greatest to ever do it, to be this, him struggling. That's how I felt last night with Aaron Rodgers. Aaron Rodgers looked like he was 41 years old last night. Have we seen the last of Aaron Rodgers?
The hard part about it is old Aaron Rodgers is still better than most old quarterbacks because he was so great when he wasn't old. Follow me on this. When you look at some of his weeks, like early in the season, September 7th against the Jets, completed 73% of his passes. The next week, 55%, all right? Then 60, then 80, right? So we can't get consistency because I just think at his age, there are still flashes of greatness. There's still flashes of Aaron being Aaron. We've seen it, and there have been a couple of times you see where everybody's wanted to really find a way to buy in. And then you see last night where, to be clear, one of the interceptions I don't really put on him, but the other I wildly put on him, the safety in the beginning of the game. That's on Aaron Rodgers. You know you got Khalil Mack, who, by the way, is also 8,000 years old, coming at you and barreling down, and you're running around playing hopscotch in the end zone? I mean, how do you put yourself at that level of risk? I would expect that from Jackson Dart. He's young. He might be caught up in the moment. I don't expect that from Aaron Rodgers, who's old enough to be most quarterbacks' dad in the NFL right now. Like, at some point, you have to play smarter with the football when you can't just rely on your body to get you out of things. And some weeks it feels like Aaron Rodgers knows that. Some weeks it just doesn't. It was just so clear last night. The numbers 16-23, 161. The numbers don't do justice to how bad it looked. And that's why Aaron Rodgers had to answer about it. Mike Tomlin had to answer about it afterwards. Like, the fact is the Steelers have been broken all year, but they've won games. And so every week that we sat here for a month saying, well, why does Vegas believe in the Ravens? Last night was why. Because if you watch the Steelers, there's nothing to believe in here. Even if they find a way to sneak into the playoffs, huzzah, you're going to get your ass kicked. Like, if the goal was to bring Aaron Rodgers in because you wanted to finally win some playoff games and finally be Super Bowl relevant, well, you're going to fail this year. And last night was a reminder of everything that's wrong with the Steelers.
Yeah, you couldn't say, okay, it was a bad game for Aaron Rodgers, but I think at this point in the season, this might just be who he is. That at 41 years old, well, a lot of miles on him, let's be fair, he might not be able to, or I think we're seeing on full display that he can't play at a high level, at a starting quarterback level in the NFL for a full 17-game season. I know the Steelers beat the Colts last week, but it was a 7-point win after the Colts coughed off the ball 6 times. It's not because Aaron Rodgers did anything heroic. And then last night, it looked like everything was catching up with him. Like, we've seen at times, like the first week of the season when the Steelers played the Jets, of course, fueled by probably a little bit of anger and revenge. Aaron Rodgers, anger and revenge, who would have thought? That Aaron Rodgers looked reminiscent of his time in Green Bay. Like, he looked like MVP Aaron Rodgers. That feels like, Fitz, that was 17 years ago, doesn't it? Because he looks like such a different quarterback. He looks like such a different player. He looks like he's old. He looks like he's hurting. And I hate that. And I think we need to stop using Tom Brady as the comparison of like, well, Brady could do it. Well, Brady's the exception to the rule. And if we use Brady as, a comparison for every argument in the NFL, then we're going to have a whole lot of flawed arguments. Brady being able to play at the level that he played at his age is the exception to the rule, and Aaron Rodgers might just be human at this point, that at 41 years old, he can't be the missing piece for this Pittsburgh Steelers team.
I feel like NFL teams in general get themselves in trouble when they stop realizing what's the exception and what's the rule. If you're drafting an inaccurate quarterback and you're saying, oh, it's okay, we can fix that because the Bills fixed Josh Allen. Okay. Is that the exception or the rule. And that at some point you have to understand that. And, Frank Schwab has said on Inside Coverage for almost a year, just because we've seen one old quarterback go out and do it doesn't mean we should just presume Aaron Rodgers can also do the same. Tom Brady was the exception to the rule. I just think part of what we're seeing here, and I want to put part of the blame also on Arthur Smith, the offensive coordinator of the Pittsburgh Steelers, because as I watched last night's game, there were a couple of times for the Chargers on the opposite side of this in a winning fashion. They had some play calls that were absolutely crazy. Some great movement one way that tricked the Steelers defense while the play went the other. I watched and I thought, wow, that was really creative. Way to work around your weaknesses and find ways to confuse the defense. What were the Steelers doing last night? They were ever supposed to confuse anything from the Chargers. It's like their offensive game plan was, we're just going to figure that Aaron Rodgers can find a way to get it done. I hated the 4th and goal, the fade route to DK Metcalf that gave them no option, and they had 2 players. It was double coverage. What are we doing? Like, Arthur Smith not doing a very good job. I'm not sure Mike Tomlin's doing a very good job. This defense has not been what anybody expected it to be. Aaron Rodgers looks old. Like, at some point, because the Steelers forgot what the exception was and what the rule is, they went out and they relied on getting lucky, and they just don't have that this year. So now what you have is a washed quarterback and an overvalued defense, and that's not a recipe for anything. I would tell you today, I have no faith that the Pittsburgh Steelers are actually going to the playoffs in the AFC this year.
This is the exact question that I was going to ask you, because yes, right now the Steelers lead the division. Yes, right now, if the season ended today and the playoffs started tomorrow, the Steelers would be in the playoffs and would have home field advantage. But they're sitting at 5-4. Does anyone feel like the Pittsburgh Steelers are going to be able to hold on to that top spot in the division? Because I don't. I think that the Steelers are just going to continue, piecing together enough to not be irrelevant, but not enough to make the playoffs. I mean, maybe there's a world where the Steelers can get in as the 6th or the 7th seed. But does this look like a Pittsburgh Steelers team that's going to be able to win a game in the playoffs? Not to me. Not if they play like they played last night. I don't think so in the slightest.
They're a game ahead right now of the Baltimore Ravens with 2 games left against the Baltimore Ravens. 2 games I think they're going to lose. And also, if you just take their record, they're in the playoffs right now because they would win their division. Outside of that, they have the same record as the Kansas City Chiefs. If you had to bet your house today on who's making the playoffs, the Steelers or the Chiefs, we're betting on the Chiefs. And the problem 100%. Is the Steelers keep putting a Band-Aid on what's wrong with the organization. Like, I think we can all acknowledge, like, you need a quarterback. You can't always find a quarterback. And I get that. Like, they tried. Kenny Pickett was an attempt to find a quarterback. Russell Wilson was an attempt to find a quarterback. Aaron Rodgers is an attempt to find a quarterback. But all it really does is consistently win Pittsburgh just enough games to get out of the hunt to actually go find the future at the quarterback position. Now, I can make that make sense in my mind if you roll the dice and you miss on somebody that you think could be a multi-year option. You've got somebody in the room, hey, we thought we could get 2 or 3 years out of. Aaron Rodgers was never going to be anything more than a Band-Aid. So if you're going to put a Band-Aid on the quarterback position, specifically in Pittsburgh, you had to do it with the expectation of a Super Bowl. You don't Band-Aid the position to put your entire franchise back 10 years, which is what I think they're doing ultimately. They're putting themselves so far out of the range of ever solving the quarterback problem that if you're going to do that to yourself, then you best be in contention for a Super Bowl to make it worthwhile. Instead, you got an old quarterback with no future at the quarterback position, no real insight on how you're going to get ahead of all the other teams that need a quarterback for the future this year or next year. You just don't suck enough to actually solve the one problem that you got to solve. And so now all of a sudden you're just mired in mediocrity yet again, and it just doesn't feel like there's any solution for Pittsburgh.
And that's why I think that's the just misery of being in the mucky middle. That's exactly where the Pittsburgh Steelers find themselves. I heard Mike Tomlin saying, we're not going to apologize for making the playoffs. I get that. I understand that, because your job as an organization and as a coach is to win football games. But at some point, just making the playoffs with the expectation that you're going to get bounced by a team that's a legitimate Super Bowl contender gets frustrating. At some point, you do have to find a long-term answer at the most important position in sports, and that's at the quarterback position. Frankly, it doesn't surprise me that the Steelers find themselves where they are, which is pretty much exactly where they were last season. A team that's just going to barely scratch and claw and make their way into the playoffs if they make their way into the playoffs at all. But not a team that's going to make some noise. But I do want to look at the Chargers side of things, Fitzy, because of course the Chargers did get a win last night. We all watched it on Sunday Night Football on primetime television, a 25-10 win. This game, I think, went probably exactly how Harbaugh wants to win football games, gross and gritty and, just running the football and playing good defense. Look, a win is a win, and a win was great and all. I don't think I feel any differently about this Chargers team today than I did before that game last night, because Justin Herbert was good, was solid. The offensive line can't protect Justin Herbert. He got sacked 5 times last night. The offensive line injuries continue to hurt and to plague this team. Played well defensively, couldn't protect the quarterback. That's just kind of who the Chargers are, and that's what we saw last night.
The Chargers are 7-3, and they are absolutely barreling towards the playoffs. And you're right, there are fatal flaws, but also if you win the way that they have been decimated on the offensive line, for every fan base that sits there and says, oh, we're losing because look all the injuries on the offensive line, the Chargers can simply step back and say, hold my beer. You got nothing on what we've gone through this year. I think last night was a reminder that the Chargers are too well coached, too well quarterbacked, and have too much talent across the board to not be in these games week in and week out. I also don't think the Chargers are necessarily a Super Bowl team as we sit, but I understand what the Chargers are doing, and I understand why the season has gone the way it's gone. A lot of credit to the Chargers. That was a game that if they'd lost, we'd say, yeah, I understand it. And instead, they went out and they absolutely took care of business.